Hello, I'm Scholet. Welcome to the second presentation on the essence of Alexander Hamilton's greatness, entitled America's Indispensable Founder. We identify the vision and the foundations upon which the United States was created. Then we compare 7 key founding fathers to understand to what degree they contributed to those foundations. The talk was hosted by the Museum of American Finance on Wall Street in New York City in 2012. These findings have been scrutinized for years and they remain intact. I hope you enjoy the unique methodology used in this analysis.
Hi, good afternoon, and welcome to the Museum of American Finance as we continue to take part in the Alexander Hamilton activities that are being showcased around the 208th anniversary of his death. Before we get started, I just want to point out that we're joined by our Vice Chair, Charlotte Beyer, here today, and the founder of the museum, John Herzog, also joins us today. Now, we have a special treat. We have the president of the Alexander Hamilton Awareness Society. It's a gentleman who spent a career at IBM in consulting, in aerospace, and then became aware of a one Alexander Hamilton, and we are rewriting the history. It is our pleasure to introduce Scholet.
Thank you very much. I've been looking forward to this for a couple of months because I had a discovery about 10 months ago. Okay, this is the essence of Alexander Hamilton's greatness. There are a lot of terrific books written, and I wish everyone would read them because every book offers something special, but a lot of people are busy in their lives and they don't do it. I know my grandfather used to do it, and some people, I said they found such joy, but it's in their own life, in their own world. I said, no, that's not good enough. We got to get this knowledge out. So I will tell you about the journey, and a lot of people share their journey with me and how this blasts through and summarizes in a very rapid way about Alexander Hamilton. I had some work to do because I looked at the caliber of people that get to speak here, and I'm like, wow. I said David Cowan, who I'm so grateful to, is pretty brave for letting someone like me come in. Look at the kind of people that they tend to have here. Doctorate degrees. So I had to work hard the last 2 months to work one out, so I came up with one. It's the best I can do, I'm sorry. I've netted it down to 2, and you'll learn more about it on our websites, but the essence of Alexander Hamilton and the discovery and narrowing it down and the pressure to the jewel is that he was Washington's indispensable partner. I've taken 2 presentations, merged into one, because I know that people around here talk fast, so I'm assuming you can think fast as well. So it's usually 2 one-hour presentations. I'm going to focus on the second one, which is the key one, but I'm going to introduce you in just a few slides, the other one. And our book just went to the printer on the first one, and the second one being America's Indispensable Founder. I think you'll be pretty excited. I've shared this with 90-year-old neighbors, with church people, with old people, young people, Venezuelans, and it's amazing. Hopefully you'll find the same thing, how you can carry this message forward and get people excited about Alexander Hamilton. This is the journey. People ask me, how did it start? And it's weird, I've never touched a drop of alcohol in my life, but this beer changed my life. We just won a championship in men's softball on the pitcher, slow pitch, and we went out, and Windsor ordered a Sam Adams beer, and Richard said, "You're pretty patriotic. Do you know about Sam Adams?" I'm like, "Oh, I know he's sort of related to John Adams." I didn't know anything about history, and history wasn't that exciting when I was growing up. It was just a lot of work. And so then I read Mark Pulse's book on Sam Adams. I'm like, oh my, I'm so ignorant, and oh my goodness, he did so much. So then I read another book, which was on Henry Knox by Mark Pulse. I'm like, this is fascinating, this is exciting, and these guys were great. So 34,000 pages later, in 2.5 years, colonial, revolutionary, constitutional, plus the first 7 presidents, I read, and something happened. In the past year, I read 37 books, either biographies or books that focus on Alexander Hamilton. I got to the 5th book, I'm like, oh my goodness, how come I didn't know about him? he's done some incredible things. The 10th book, my jaw dropped and said, how come America doesn't know about this incredible guy? So I couldn't wait. I was so excited. Last September 17th, I went up to the Grange. It was reopening. I'm like, I'm going to meet all these people who can tell me about Alexander Hamilton, all the resources on Alexander Hamilton. I went up there and they said, we'll start in years, and people who write the great books are not really available, for me to ask questions. So they said, why don't you do it? I'm like, oh, come on. So on the way home, I said, well, I could start something and turn it over to the National Park Service. Well, I was reading 100 to 120 hours per week, and I said, gee, I'm a little bit above average in intelligence. I should be able to narrow it down so I could tell, thank you, so I can tell my friends, I don't want to leave you in the dark, but.
Colors look good.
Good, much better.
Yeah, red, white, and blue.
Red, white, blue, that was my daughter. She improved my presentation tremendously good. So I came back, and it was 3 weeks after the Grange had opened, and I said, there's got to be a way. Well, 4 o'clock in the morning, October 8th, I'm there frustrated, like, why can't I narrow it down so I can tell my friends, because there's just too much on. I remembered that right at Palisades, across the Hudson River, we were trained in executive consulting, and there was this new methodology, and they put us through the ringers. I learned, I said, I'm going to apply it. 57 minutes later, I had the 2 statements and all the proofs that you're going to see tonight. For 4 days, I just wrote and pulled in all my thousands of notes and Post-it notes, and that's what you're going to see. And so that's what the aha discovery. Of course, that's the Alexander Hamilton awareness, achievement, appreciation, whatever you want it to be. So finally, the mystery is solved, and hopefully you'll agree when this is over today. After I put something together, we came up and I had to visit to see how credible this is, because I'm not a historian. And I met with a chief historian within the federal government, and this is what he said after he reviewed the presentation. That was a surprise to me. And being a computer science math person, I'm not good at grades and English and history, so I need facts, please. And so that was kind of. Then the information was brought forward to one of a senior American historian who you would recognize, and this is what he said. I put XX decades because it would give it away who it was, and I didn't ask permission. This is the other comment. And that meant the world to me because it had to be accurate. I've had people test it, and it's held up since day one, so I'm really happy about that. First one, Washington's indispensable partner. This is the comment. Alexander Hamilton was George Washington's indispensable partner in the war, in the peace, over 22 years. And many historians said, oh yeah, I understood the pieces, but 22 years he was there with ideas and supporting and everything. So that was the first statement I came up with. The second statement was, and this is a little bit bold, but I got the proof I'm going to share with you. Alexander Hamilton created the vision and the foundations upon which the United States of America achieved greatness. And that's what we're going to focus on, showing you the proof of that one. I'll show you the summary on the first one. The first one, partners over 22 years. This was the eulogy for George Washington after he passed away. Have a number of you seen this quote before? I thought it was a more popular quote. So this is what was thought of George Washington a couple hundred years ago. As you know, he was the only person that people just had such faith in and were allied, and even when they had their debates, they believed in him that he would do well. Well, I was like, well, how do people feel about him today? So I used to say last July 4th, but now it's a little more. About a year ago, this is what they said. George Washington, about half. Thomas Jefferson, a quarter. Benjamin Franklin, a sixth. And then John Adams and James Madison. So this is the thinking in the public. This is what people are aware of. For whatever reason, but this is the perception. So I said, okay. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take George Washington, I'm going to find all of his responsibilities and find out who helped him the most. So you'll see, and I'm going to go quickly on this so I can get to the heart of the other one, but there's Revolutionary War responsibility, constitutional, first presidential term, second presidential term, Luck going back to his beloved Mount Vernon, and then the quasi-war with France. People always ask, what was that? Well, France, even though we weren't the declared war, they were still attacking our ships, taking our sailors, taking our goods, and we were about to declare war And Washington was asked by President Adams at the time to please lead in preparation for war. So these were all the responsibilities. So then I said, okay, for each founder, we're going to compare in those time frames. So who assisted George Washington the most? These, I took George Washington, the other four that were on the bar graph, and then through research, this is generally accepted and agreed to that John Jay, Alexander Hamilton, and Henry Knox were very instrumental to George Washington's success. So I said, okay, I'm going to find out how they did in each of those time frames of public service. Now, I'm an IBMer, I'm sorry, but we do lots of presentations, so people said, you have to explain how this works. So, again, this is George Washington's responsibilities. If a founder, which we're going to show you the money chart in a second, is solid, that means they were significantly valuable to George Washington. The less color that that founder has at that time frame, the less valuable they were to George Washington. So if you see white space, didn't do much for George Washington. Okay, here it is. I want you to look closely. If there's more color for the founder, there was more value and contribution. The more white, okay, let me see this astute crowd. If you can figure out who was the most indispensable partner to George Washington. You ready? Well, first let me talk about July 2nd. I had so much fun with that because that's when we actually declared independence. The paperwork was the 4th, and most of them signed it on October 2nd. So I had fun with that with people because they were shocked to know that. Okay, and George Washington passed away December 14th. Here we go. Let's see if you can figure it out. 1, 2, 3. Ben Franklin, John Jay, James Smith. Can you read that okay? Okay, good. Now, in our first book, which Nicole and I just got to the printers, we have the proof of every one of those founders behind every one of the colors in each time frame for George Washington. This is not what each of them did to help the nation. This is what they did either help him win the war or help him win the progress of creating our nation with the 2 terms of president. So that chart, which I also have laminated and big, which I carry around with me for discussions, that really impresses people. Okay, so pretty clear, I could tell you're a smart crowd, you figured that out. Okay, now we're going to move on to Alexander Hamilton as America's indispensable. We talked about what is indispensable, not valuable, not helpful, not, but indispensable. Could not have occurred without Alexander Hamilton. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to step through this now. And dates were not my thing for history, so I only ask people, please, just 5 dates. Work with me on 5 dates, and it used to work. Again, Declaration of Independence, people understand that. 1783? No way, I thought we beat the British in a year or 2. 7 years, so that freaks people out. Then it said, oh, and of course we gained our independence, and then we had this great constitution, and we moved happily ever after. No. I'm going to show you the worst period in American history, before or after, ever, not even close, was from 1783 when we got our independence. Yep, disaster, excellent. Until we got the Constitution going. Then George Washington was the first constitutional president. Give me credit for that because I get no arguments on that. Because there's some people about the early presidents during the Confederation. And then George Washington passed away. Worst period ever. I'm going to go through this sort of quickly because we're condensed, but you've got it. There were social problems, war-torn towns that weren't being rebuilt, rebellions. I mean, the military people that gave us our independence weren't being paid, and so who are the worst people to have that are unhappy? People with arms in their hands. Also, the states were forming confederations of sort of like, and moving in disunity. There was no unity. They were together to help us get independence, but then they're off to do their thing, and they weren't. In fact, many of the smartest leaders, when we got our independence, they went home to their state, and who were left were more second rate. They weren't going to be able to have much leverage over the states. Okay, political problems. In fact, I love this quote. That's an understatement. This guy is good. And the Continental Congress and the Congress of Confederation, it was powerless. And people don't realize that. There was strong opposition. In fact, when the Constitution became ratified, on June 21st, 1788. New York and Virginia were not part of it. Of course, that helped to move them along. Within 5 weeks, yes, they did join, and a lot of interesting stories there. When George Washington was inaugurated as president, right down the road here, these two states hadn't even become part of our union. Economic problems, and these, oh my goodness, it's all hyperinflation, stagnant economic activity, real estate was bad. We were a laughing stock from Europe. This country was good. Look at the debt, and this is then the money value back then. And then, of course, the individual states had another 25 million. Just terrible. This is where they think that I may be trying to do marketing because I came here, but this is one of the best books out there to understand. I think this is a marketing title, One Nation Under Debt, because we're having debt issues. If you read this book, it tells you how terrible it was and how the solutions, sophistication of Hamilton, that's just a terrific book. The day that made America was 9/11. And maybe in 20 years we can celebrate that, but it's a terrible event here in New York, so we don't post it. But 9/11, I think it was a profound day, and Arthur agrees with me as we met and agreed. The year was 1789, where things were going to change. First, that day, September 11th, George Washington nominated Alexander Hamilton for the position of Secretary of Treasury. That same day, they confirmed him. Oops, sorry. That same day, Alexander Hamilton got busy on an economic system because he knew he'd already been talking, and the next day on the 12th, he already started putting a loan together to the Bank of New York, which is located here, to get the national government going. So through all my analysis, 9/11 was the day that we pivoted from a terrible state of disunity, economic problems, moving forward. This action pulled us up, pulled us out, and transformed us. So it pivoted us from poverty and possibility with the Constitution to prosperity. Many people have taken our Constitution. It's not sufficient. It's not alone to be successful. And economic strength, you'll see, made the difference. We're going to do a step through each of these. See the italicized. We're going to talk about what he created. What was the vision? What were the foundations? How did he unite us? And how did it help the United States achieve greatness? These are the phases of Hamilton's accomplishment. First, he carried out his research, and we'll talk about that. By the way, this is not a valid picture. Most people have considered to be valid. It's in the Library of Congress, but it's not attributed. It could have been someone doing miniatures. But anyway, it's there and it's cute. He created a vision, 1777 to 17. We'll show you that. A call to action, how he persisted unbelievably year after year. Watch what he did. How he united the states from 1791 and to 1795, and lastly, how that led the United States to achieve greatness. His research. This guy's unbelievable. He came from the Caribbean, his first almost 16 years, and he comes here, illegitimate, poor, but some people saw some promise in him. While they're freezing, while they're fighting the war, Hamilton could not stop getting books and reading the top economic, commerce, trade, law. And this guy was just an incredible genius. And he studied these different systems, and they do have the records of 112 pages of notes he took from this study. Fortunately, he had early insights. 90-some% of the people had no clue about finance and trade in the world. Well, he was in his little island of St. Croix, and he worked for a merchant, Nicholas Kruger and Kurt Wright and Beekman. And then when he was 14, he headed the thing up for 6 months and did great, 14 years old. But he had to deal with the Danish, the Dutch, the Spanish, the French, the British. He had to know how to exchange money. He had to know raw goods, finished goods, slavery. He saw which he was a strong abolitionist in New York State here. But most people didn't have that insight. They couldn't relate to it, except for like Robert Morris and a few of those people. But if he didn't have that insight, I don't know if he would have understood through his normal education. So we were very fortunate that he had those insights. He was the driving force. He never stopped communicating with the leaders. So James Duane, New York Representative, 1780. 1781, Robert Morris, he outlined a financial plan. The Continentalist, I have to admit, I didn't read this till more recently. You should see how much of the Federalist Papers are in there. You should see how much of the constitutional ideas are in there. It's just amazing how early he's like. Then he's in New York State. He drafted the first call to improve the powers of Congress, the Articles of Confederation. Many states wanted to be weak and impotent, but he thought it was really important. The first call from the public body. Then he served the Congress of Confederation. He was there with Madison, great friends for 6 years. They accomplished and thought a lot, like just an incredible partnership. He tried to share his ideas again, financial, economic, and government. He knew they weren't quite ready, so he left early. Next, he drafted the call in the United States for calling for an actual national convention, 2 years before the most call. And then, I couldn't believe it. In 1786, at the Annapolis Convention, he called and penned for the Constitutional Convention. I'm like, how come people don't know he's the father of the Constitutional Convention? I mean, that should be celebrated. And read the document. This document had to inspire people that were leery of any changes to the Articles of Confederation to actually show up, and they showed up. So read it, please. It's fun. In fact, there was one person in Virginia who had quite an interesting phrase when he heard about this convention. Does anyone know what Patrick Henry said?
I smell a rat in Philadelphia.
I smell a rat. He knew they were probably going to want to do more than little tweaking of the Articles of Confederation, and they weren't supporting it. Good. There was no economic system or government system in the world. This was a total new experiment. And as they laid out how they wanted to proceed and form this nation, there were two distinct visions. And this is, I think, is special. So if you just look at this, because it talks about the major debate, the major parties, the major issues, and I think this finding is pretty exciting. At least that's what people have said. Okay, we're going to step through creating the vision. There were two visions. Clear visions. So I said, okay, let me list them. I found 8. Maybe there should be only 7, maybe there should be 10. I don't know, but these are a good enough representation. Vision 1, we need to be nation-focused. We need to be united. The other, state-focused. Move down to governance, society versus individual. Representative constitutional form of government versus democratic form of government. Do you know what Ben Franklin said when a woman asked her, what's democracy? It's 2 wolves and a sheep voting on what's for dinner. And all of them agreed at the Constitutional Convention, the worst form in 5,000 years of government leadership is democracy. And that's why they abhorred that concept. But anyway, the national economic system versus you do your own thing and you make your way. Mixed economy versus agriculture is the only noble industry there is. British systems, French systems. Cities were valued, cities were to be avoided, military value, military. So I said, oh, that's pretty interesting. Okay, let's get a third column here and say, okay, which one of these prevailed? Well, look closely. You ready? Oh my goodness. Every single element of Vision 1 is what we live with today and survive. Vision 2, not a one of those survived. I mean, this is incredible. So then people are like, well, who is Vision 1? Aha, yes. And that's the truth. I'm not here to want to like someone or not. I'm just trying to share the truth and the findings and the analysis. Vision 2. And so whose vision prevailed? Yes, he's such a good guy. Okay, so that's the vision. That's gonna be. And guess what? George Washington had to deal with the 2 visions, and 2 of them were in his cabinet. And they continued to share why each of their vision was the best. And George Washington, being a sober, patient, analytical, good judgment, surround himself with good people, hear both sides of the story, every single time, seriously. Now they throw a few little twists of words and stuff together, but went with Hamilton. And it got so frustrating for Thomas Jefferson. I mean, really, this is the truth. It got so frustrating, he has to resign early from the cabinet. Washington said, okay, but I need to stay a little bit longer so we have to transition to the next term. I mean, this is serious. I mean, all I'm trying to say is Hamilton, the idea guy, the guy who made things happen, and doesn't get the credit when you look at the charts in the American public. That's what we're working on. Okay, so now, okay, created the foundations, and these are the 5 I chose. Everyone talks about the Constitution, we know the Constitution is great. But have you read the Constitution? Oh shoot, I have my thing. The Constitution, if you look at the executive, and you look at the legislative, other than how old you have to be, how you get voted, how you get thrown out of office, there's not much there. And why was it? Because there were more duties assigned to the legislative branch because that's who they thought would lead our government forward, right? So that's one thing, but then there's the other thing. There were 55 show up, 39 signed it, but okay, maybe you're enlightened, but now you got to convince the states. The ratification was tough. It was difficult, right? So that was one key part of the foundation to get us to that point. The executive branch, legislative, and judicial, I call this a two-dimensional definition of our government. You had to breathe life into it. You had to make it three-dimensional. You had to implement it to know what it really meant. So then we looked at each of the three branches that our government was in. And please, everybody, yes, the Constitution is great, but there are two systems that Hamilton dealt with. The government system, which are the bottom four, and the economic system. That's why I love the Museum of American Finance, because someone's got to tell the truth. It's both of those complicated systems that myself don't understand as much as I wish I did. It's taken me a long time to get this far. But there are two systems. So really 1787 is when those foundations of our nation started, and by the time George Washington left at the end of his term in 1797, it was largely established except for one area, and the military wasn't established, but we'll talk about that. Okay, you did so good the last time. So for those 5 areas, it did the same thing. Okay, who were those founding fathers? Did the most to create those foundations? Solid, big contribution. The more white, the less they contributed to creating the foundations of which we live with today. See if you can be 2 for 2 in figuring this out. Okay, ready? The only person who isn't here is General Henry Knox. He just wasn't in this arena, even though he just did a lot of terrific things. But these are the 7. And this is fact-based. We got the facts. The second book, which is based on this summary of Alexander Hamilton, will be going to the printers in a few weeks after we get back to Florida. But the facts are there, and I keep trying to tell people, what am I missing? And no one's coming up with anything. And people are, oh my goodness. So you look at it, 3 solids and 2 that are almost solid. The only reason was because he wasn't in the legislative branch, but we'll talk about that in the judicial branch, how much he contributed. Look at how many, 1, 2, Master did a lot. That's what we're going to talk about now. How are we doing on time? My pace here. Okay, good, beautiful. Now, this is a special note. John Marshall deserves a lot of credit because he sustained a lot of what had happened under the Washington, the Federalists, and played just such a key role. So I want to be clear, that was after 1797.
Did you say John Roberts? John Roberts.
Okay.
John Roberts is very important. He's the second youngest Chief Justice ever appointed.
That's right.
John Marshall is the youngest, so keep your eye.
Okay, I'm watching.
I'll be a predictor on that one.
So these are the things I'm going to go sort of quickly. A lot of people know this, but just to talk about what Hamilton did. I'm just going down the Hamilton line, and this is in the government system. He led the call, founded the Constitutional Convention. He was the New York delegate to the Constitutional Convention. There were 2 others. They weren't supportive of it. They ran away because they didn't want to be any part of it. Hamilton served on 2 committees, the rules, which determines the success very often, including the secrecy, so people could share their ideas and maybe change later on. Style and arrangement. You wouldn't believe how many people don't know who wrote the preamble of the Constitution and the essential draft of the Constitution. Gouverneur Morris. Oh yeah, Morris. Okay, I didn't hear 2 syllables. Yeah, Gouverneur Morris. Yes, I'm sorry. And they were both on the style and arrangement. So a lot of the wording actually comes from Gouverneur Morris, which a lot of people don't give credit as to. Hamilton proposed a new constitution. It was one of like 6, and I don't know if that's really the count, but he did have a constitution. And Gouverneur Morris, who wrote the Constitution, said it was the best form of government proposed, but no one took any action on it. Hamilton knew there was not going to be action on it. But you know what value it was? The people who were looking at the Articles of Confederation didn't want to change it much. So when the Virginia plan, right, Randolph plan, Madison, it was like, oh, this is a bit of a stretch. But when Hamilton showed his bold plan, all of a sudden the Madison plan sounded pretty moderate and pretty reasonable. So that played a bit. Hamilton's the only one to sign the U.S. Constitution. You'll notice how to look at it. Ratification, again, he played a leadership role in getting it ratified, especially effect on the big states. Because the proceedings were secret, the American public was being filled with stuff by people who didn't want us. So they made up a lot of stuff, and people who were there were supposed to keep it secret, so it was getting out of control. So who is the father of the Federalist Papers? And you never hear that. Alexander Hamilton. In fact, we just stopped where the sloop stopped in the Poyster Point or Deming's Point in Beacon, where he got off the sloop after outlining the expectations for the Federalist Papers up near Poughkeepsie. He chose co-authors. Gouverneur Morris was too busy, and was it Dewar? Dewar had written something that wasn't quite standard. Didn't accept what he did. So he moved on. So James, but Hamilton chose the co-authors for this. It's really important. He obtained a printing house to print it. Usually you had to pay ahead of time because who's really going to pay? How are you ever going to make money? But Hamilton was able to pull that off as they were feeding so many, because there were 85 total. Hamilton wrote 51, generally accepted, Madison 29, and John Jay 5. It's become the official interpretation of the Supreme Court. He led the New York ratification. I lived in Poughkeepsie. I worked at IBM in Poughkeepsie, and it was 1989. I should have known it was the 200th year. 88. I should have known that, and I didn't. That upsets me. That here it was, 46 against and 19 in favor to begin with, and the governor, Clinton, against it. And he had them sign a loyalty oath that they would never approve the Constitution. Well, Melancton Smith, who deserves a lot of credit, nobody knows his name, did have integrity, and after a while he told Hamilton, I am persuaded by your arguments. Of course, with other states coming in, there were a lot of elements to the strategy, but it did end up being victorious, 30 to 27. And Hamilton kept it going for 6 weeks. If they voted too early, it would have been over with for New York State. Formation executive branch. What did Hamilton do? He was the first Secretary of the United States, and he was the first Secretary of the Treasury. He fought for the energetic executive. Again, people thought the legislative would make all the decisions, the executive just carry it out. There's nothing in the Constitution other than carry out what we come up with. Hamilton wrote all the Federalist Papers for the executive branch, 67 to 77. So he just thought it'd be a debating society where we get things done. And Hamilton was an action-oriented kind of guy. So, and then implied powers, again, a big part of the battle. If we have to accomplish this distinct number of responsibilities, we have to do we should be allowed to do everything to accomplish that, and that's the implied powers. Key advisor George Washington. George Washington said, I can fight wars, but I don't know this political stuff. What do I do? And Hamilton gave him a structured purpose for his week of what he would do. Foreign affairs, economic, legislative. Hamilton was across the board. Of course, when you deal with the financial world, you really have to pay attention. And Jefferson didn't show up for a year. So Hamilton really was involved with so much. They sort of called him the prime minister. They sort of teased him, yes. Right? Yeah. And of course, this is the one that upset a lot of people when it first came out in around 1826 or to 1850. Maybe it really came out. I know Elizabeth fought and got it from the Rufus King pen, but he authored the farewell address, and that's an interesting story. And I encourage you to read books. So it's just fascinating, fascinating. And now we look at diplomacy and military. What did Hamilton do? The Neutrality Proclamation. He came up with cogent arguments of why it was to our advantage. First of all, we were weak. We wanted to keep our commerce going. And so neutrality and a lot of issues Congress didn't feel they had the right. Hamilton led the charge. The Whiskey Rebellion. And I'm glad to see a lot of books actually give Hamilton credit for this, which is rare. Going to Washington and said, we need to take this. It's a serious issue. Otherwise, it'll degrade our constitutional effectiveness. And Washington took it halfway. Hamilton continued it and actually got high marks when you read fair interpretations of how he handled the resolution out in western Pennsylvania. The Jay Treaty, I hear about that all the time, right? I just found, oh my goodness, it was Hamilton who wrote the strategy, and then Washington said, this might not pass, and so Hamilton again, George Washington left him to write some essays, and it just squeaked by. And again, it wasn't perfect, it wasn't as full as we wanted, but it moved us forward in a harmonious relationship with our largest trading partners. 75 to 80% of our trading was with Britain. So the people in America that thought we should line up with the French weren't understanding how that really wasn't helpful from our financial perspective. In the Quasi-War, you may have heard of this, George Washington was asked by President Adams to lead it, and Washington had two conditions. Number one, I will not lead the charge until we're ready to actually fight. Number two, I will define the order of the three generals that report to me. A lot of fun story about that. He chose Alexander Hamilton in first place behind him, which shows with Washington's judgment that he knew that Hamilton was the best to do the heavy lifting. I mean, the stuff on the uniforms, the food, the procedures. I mean, Hamilton just did a terrific job. Fortunately, it was resolved diplomatically. I think a little bit in my heart, I think there were a lot of French sympathizers here saying, oh, they're getting pretty serious, and it was going to cost France more money. They were short on money. Let's just resolve this. But anyway, West Point, he formally proposed it, and it's interesting the president gets credit for it, thwarted it, pushed back numerous times, but it was signed in 1802, so President Jefferson was the hero of creating West Point. So that was interesting. Now we move to the judicial legislative. Alexander Hamilton is everywhere. Judicial review. I believe that New York City largely got its starting for success based on this. After we won our independence, the New York State passed laws which were pretty abusive to the Loyalists. But in the Treaty of Paris that says you were not allowed to do that, Hamilton went to bat in New York State, in the judicial, and convinced them this was wrong, improper. So the half the money that fled, the Loyalists had the money here, half of them stayed. We had money. We could rebuild the city, blah, 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 blah. And a year late, in that year also, the Bank of New York. I did just learn this recently, that Hamilton was asked to take up the argument in the first constitutionality case, the Supreme Court, the carriage tax. So he was saying, do you know that when John Jay stepped down as Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, who George Washington asked to be the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court? Aha, Alexander Hamilton. And he wasn't interested. And then also an unfinished U.S. Senate term, John Jay offered to Hamilton. So you see the leadership, seeing the incredibleness of Alexander Hamilton. Truth as a defense for libel came a little bit later, but that established precedence in the federal government, the Federalist Papers. He wrote all the judicial papers, number 78 through 83. And what's interesting when I talk to audiences, they're like, it's an old document, these old white guys. When they find out that the use and reference of the Federalist Papers is increasing in the last 40 years, it's becoming more relevant and more relied upon. So this is a great contribution that we're blessed by today. Legislative. Usually the legislature writes its laws, and they knew, in fact, during the Constitutional Convention, you may not know, they tried to do an economic plan. It was so wrong, they said, let's get this Constitution ratified first, and then we'll find a way. And of course, they believed in Hamilton. And Hamilton wrote the recommendations, went into the legislative, they worked through it, voted on it, and came back. So that was interesting, his contribution to legislative treasure. I'm sorry there's so much here, but there just is. I mean, he's just that incredible. And that's the thing about him. It's so difficult to talk about because he did so much. He just did the impossible. His economic system led to the Constitution's success. We were in such bad shape that we could have broken into confederation. We could have other countries like attacking like Virginia, whatever. People didn't feel like Americans, but the economic system we're going to talk about led, I believe, to the Constitution's success, and without it, it wouldn't have. Because I'm telling you, Virginia and New Yorkers said, yeah, they passed it. We'll pretend we're with it, and we'll, it easily could have gone in that direction. He established the Departments of Procedures, the Bank of the United States. I mean, just incredible. Helped manage the revenue, the sinking fund to pay off the debt that exists. How many times have you heard about Hamilton? He created the national debt. It already existed. He just put together a brilliant approach to pay it down, package it. So here he gets labeled a schemer, and he was the one solving the problem, and that was paid off on time. According to Hamilton's plan, who gets the credit for that?
Andrew Jackson.
Andrew Jackson. Very good. Gets credit. So presidents are still taking credit for Hamilton's work.
And he destroyed the bank, too.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's a whole other power.
Where was
Okay.
the first bank located?
The first in Philadelphia.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's right around from the second bank, which has a lot of the original oil paintings of the founding fathers. If you haven't seen it, it's a really incredible place. Last resort. If your economic system is tanking and the dominoes are going, you put a floor under it and you work through it, and that was a very creative reaction to a very difficult situation in the early 1700s. Credit and debt. Again, I'm just going to summarize it, but we had such debt. And he decided boldly to take it all on, to establish the fund to pay it off. And another brilliant element, it had to be voluntary, because these wealthy people loaned money to the states, and they were getting maybe sometimes 12 to 14%. Of course, the money was devaluating because each state had its own currency, but it was brilliant because it wasn't coerced, it wasn't forced, so that was really wise. And part of getting the assumption in that he worked on brokering a deal to give away his states, his cities' beloved interest in having the U.S. Capitol here, but he just knew it was better for the nation, and so he took a lot of difficulty over that. Establishing the full value of contracts, many fascinating stories about how we became credible. No, he said to us, it's like simple. Who would lend money to someone who isn't credible and paying it back and trying to get out of it? You weren't. So he said, yeah, we'll pay a little bit lower, but the banks will be willing to loan, and that will be our economic engine. Just again, foresighted. U.S. credit. He knew that if we wanted to grow our economy, that we had to have a source of capital, and that credit was critical to that. Taxes and industry, go through this fast. The U.S. Customs was his. The Coast Guard, which was the revenue cutter service, to make sure that the money was collected. Tariffs. He wasn't Secretary of Treasury, but on July 4th, 2 months before, in 1789, he actually was the one that largely wrote the Legislative Tariff Act. So he deserves credit for that. Protect our industries and help us move forward. U.S. corporation ending. In fact, I have to give David Cowan, who was one of the co-authors of this, I heard about this thing called the modern corporation 200 years ago, but the modern corporation. And just the beauty of it, finally explained very well in David's book as a co-author, is that they used to have partnerships, and whenever they would want it, like one person wanted to leave the partnership, they had to redo all the legal work, and so there was resistance to that. Also, if one of those partners got sued or got in trouble, they could penetrate and get the other partner's money, and so it just was difficult, and it stopped the economic engine from going. So this new approach, and another brilliant one that I learned, David, was that these businesses, to incorporate, had to go to the state and say, I would like to incorporate. You know what the state would say? We got 7 of those businesses. I don't think we need an 8th. But there were always ways that things got done, right? Hamilton came with the Articles of Affiliation. I think that's Articles of Affiliation. Brilliant, where you could form this relationship, but you didn't have to go for permission to the state. You know what New York State did? Because someone was copying what Hamilton did? Oh my goodness, okay. No longer do you have to come for permission. Just give us a little fee for registering your corporation with us. So again, these are the things that drive our economy and entrepreneurship. So these are just, I mean, all these things he's doing within a couple of years. Manufacturing sector. He knew we needed to remove our dependency on other countries if we were going to defend ourselves, be successful. He also believed that Americans aren't all going to own plantations or work on farms or have small farms. And he knew that every individual, and he was so good at including everybody, would have some talent. And with manufacturing, you can find different ways to participate. So again, it expanded the opportunity to grow the economy. And Saturday, we're going over to Patterson, which Hamilton founded that city. And is named Patterson after the governor. And that was because the governor gave 10 years free of taxes, an enterprise zone, in essence, to give it a chance to grow. I'll go quickly. Bank of New York Stock Exchange, the first corporate share of stock he did on stock exchange. U.S. notes, I was just talking with David. He showed me some of the early notes, the 3%, the 6%, and the deferreds. It was so brilliant and unique. You offered 3 different kinds of notes and it attracted different kind of money. And half the money that came in the United States was from overseas because establishing credit was paying down the debt. The U.S. Mint, this guy just paid attention to like 0.00173 copper and all this kind of stuff. It was just amazing. And he created the U.S. dollar as the official national monetary amount and did the relationship to like the Spanish and the pounds. Again, these things just allowed business. Capitalism, he understood if you want capitalism, you have to have capital. And we'll go quickly here. One of the things I love about Hamilton is he believed in merit over inherent. Some of my favorite phrases about him because it really summarizes him so beautifully. The people that actually fought Hamilton were those that inherited, so they sound like they're the leaders of the people. It was Hamilton who developed the opportunities for people to make the most of themselves in a more diverse area. Mixed economy, we got that. The Society of Useful Manufacturing in Patterson, protective tariffs, management, go through quickly, but it's weird that someone who's brilliant and a genius in the big picture is also a genius dedicated to the details. It's unbelievable. In fact, the Jeffersonians kept trying to trip him up, audit him, not a penny. And then when he was about to resign halfway through Washington term, he says, I want you to do it one more time, and I want it to be the most incredible audit you've ever done, because I don't want you to say anything bad. And he did it, and just unbelievable that he did all this detailed and big picture. Just that he studied things in minute detail of what products would come in the United States to know what tariff would be too high to hurt trade or to encourage it. I mean, the stuff that he had to do. Ron Chernow, the whole statistical basis of government took shape under him, maybe still being used today. And he had to handle all of these responsibilities, and he still had a great nature. Okay, we're getting toward the end of that. Committed every debt was paid on time. Again, credibility. So what united us? Well, politically and legally, getting that constitutional convention, getting it ratified, judicial review to make sure that if a law is passed that supersedes the state. So there was state respect for the U.S. Constitution, federal response to the Whiskey Rebellion, said that individuals need to respect the Constitution. How were we economically united? All the debts, because the people that loaned the money wanted to make sure the state was successful. Once all the money was assumed, then all of a sudden the money people wanted to make sure the nation was successful. Established credit, and then it's 3 or 4 years in when people start being proud of being Americans for the first time instead of a member of their state. Okay, and these are the kinds of things, I'll just let you read them, and you can see that Hamilton is written all over those things that have made the country of the United States being so successful for the last couple of centuries. There isn't anybody who even comes close to Hamilton. Those are the two statements. So just, these are the last couple of slides. So I go back to this, and this is just interesting, just to an example. Again, all of these people contributed, please don't misunderstand, valuably to the United States. That's not the purpose of this. It's just to say there's work to be done, to give credit where it's due, and that's part of the AHA Society, the Alexander Hamilton Awareness Society, just to give them his fair credit. That's it. That's what we're working on. Hopefully you'll help us along the way. So these are just two of interest. Let's just look at these two summary slides and see where Hamilton is versus those two. Who's valuable to Washington? Now, people think I have an issue with Jefferson. I don't. It's just that he didn't fight in the war, and he was over in France during our constitutional time frame, helping them write their constitution. And then partway in, they split ways. So there just wasn't much that Jefferson did for Washington. Benjamin Franklin. Benjamin Franklin.
Give him a little.
Yeah.
The French Alliance. You got to give him at least 20 points.
Oh yeah, that's right here. French Alliance, beautiful. That was my next point. French Alliance right here. We wouldn't have won the Revolutionary War without. Critical. These three were involved in the Treaty of Paris, which of course helped Washington because they have to fight over. But the person who deserves most of the credit, John Jay. It's amazing because we had an agreement with the French here that they got to approve whatever Treaty of Paris we had. And so the terms will be, and John Jay said, no, the French are going to do it to their advantage. He went just to the British, worked it out, and then beautifully Franklin went and sort of smoothed over them a little bit. Okay, so that's on that, but the more important chart is, okay, what did Thomas Jefferson do? Tells the Constitution he wasn't here. Executive branch was here for a while, but that went in the other direction. I can't do negative colors, so what I'm doing that. Legislative branch, judicial branch, and definitely not the economic system. Just trying to be fair, just trying to tell the truth. Benjamin Franklin, he showed up, led his prestige. There were two couple of things where they were struggling, and he helped them get through that. But as you mentioned, he passed away before we had a constitutional. He passed away in early 1790. So he just wasn't here to do it. So it's interesting when you look at the chart about, who's the greatest founding father. It's just interesting that Hamilton's not. It's just not right. So we're working on that. That's our purpose. Okay, let's go through this. I think that's. So don't let anyone tell you that Alexander Hamilton was not president of the United States. Right, John? He was president. And he was also prescient of the United States. Look up that word. I didn't want to use the extra slide, but it's incredible. Forward thinking, see things before everybody else. So he was prescient of the United States and president of the United States. So you can use that. The other thing I talked about is he was the P-R-O-P-H, prophet of America, and he was also the prophet of America, P-R-O-F-I-T. This is what the dictionary told me is what precedent means. Doesn't that really talk Hamilton? Okay, so we need you to help celebrate Hamilton. I know some of you people will do that. We need you to share. We have websites. We've handed out things. It's the AHA Society. We have a website called All Things Hamilton. I thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed the presentation on Alexander Hamilton, America's indispensable founder. Those interested in the first presentation in this series, Washington's indispensable partner, use C-SPAN's American History link below. In this presentation, we explore George Washington's public service to the nation from 1775 until 1799, and then the degree to which 7 key founding fathers contributed to his success during the war and during his terms as president. The Alexander Hamilton Awareness Society, or the AHA Society for short, has a number of resources for those who would like to learn more about Alexander Hamilton, including 2 key websites. One, for programs, events, newsletters, etc., use the ahasociety.com. For Alexander Hamilton original writings, recommended books, and publications, use allthingshamilton.com. Thank you for your interest in Alexander Hamilton, America's indispensable founder.